There we go. Okay, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Bucks County, I'd like to welcome and thank you for joining us here this evening. Before we start our presentation, I'll share a little bit of information about concerning closed captioning. Hopefully you can see that we have enabled the closed captioning live transcript feature. If you like it, do nothing and it will continue throughout the program. If you'd rather not see the captions, hover your cursor over the CC box on your Zoom toolbar and choose to disable the feature. If you don't see a CC box, look for the ellipsis, which is 3 dots and the word more, and click on that to disable the closed caption. If you want to keep the captions but move them to another location on your screen, you can click on the caption and drag it to another spot. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, we'll begin. And as you can see in the statement on the screen, the League of Women Voters advocates for voter education, issues, and democracy. Tonight's presentation deals with 2 of the League's issues and will be presented in 2 parts. The first part will provide a brief update on rules reform in Harrisburg, also known as the Fix Harrisburg campaign. And part 2 will deal with redistricting reform and the elimination of gerrymandering, which is an issue that the League has been involved with for over 3 decades. We have reserved the chat for questions regarding the 2 topics. For part 1, please limit your questions to rules reform. We will answer those when that part of the program is over. Then feel free to add questions regarding redistricting reform, and again, we will answer those at the conclusion of part 2. Tonight's speaker, Rich Rafferty, represents Fair Districts PA, or FDPA for short, which has been a fiscal project of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania since 2015. FDPA is a nonpartisan coalition of citizens and organizations seeking to reform Pennsylvania's redistricting rules and make the process of drawing maps impartial, transparent, and accountable. Following a career as IT director at 2 international firms, Rich now presents FDPA redistricting programs statewide and serves as FDPA lead for Montgomery County. Please welcome Rich Rafferty.
Thank you, Sharon. Let's see if we get started here. Okay, I'm going to turn on.
And I have to stop my share.
Yeah, let me know when you see a Fix Harrisburg presentation.
Yep.
Cool.
It's coming. Yep. We got it. Thank you.
Little jammed up here. Thank you all for the invitation, for starters, and for your continued devotion to helping us solve some of these tough problems in Pennsylvania. I have no background, at least prior to Fair Districts, of being a political or an electoral advocate of any kind. So this has been some kind of education, often frustrating for sure, to resolve some of these tough problems that we're all encountering here. Sharon, I think you'd said we're good till what, 10:30, 11 o'clock? Is that what it is?
Sure.
So I'll just invite everyone to strap in. I've got 414 slides and there's no escape. You cannot leave. So stay with us, but no, we'll get through these. Just hold your questions to the end. And again, some extra patience. Thank you for those of you perhaps who have seen these before. But we'll start with what we call our Fix Harrisburg campaign. It's all about rules reform. And we'll give you a brief synopsis of a little bit of where we've been, why it started, and more importantly, where are we going from here. We did get started with Fix Harrisburg, or rules reform, in 2022, after the final congressional and state legislative maps were done. The new district maps were in place. We kind of came up for air as a Fair Districts group statewide, dusted ourselves off a little bit and said, you know, we need to get back to the root cause of why we, Fair Districts as a group, got our butt kicked by our Pennsylvania legislature in 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. Here we were with legislation, reform legislation, with redistricting on both a very grand scale as well as even a modified scale. And in all cases during those 4 years, we had over 60% of the state legislator, and that includes the House and Senate, 60% of all legislators who co-sponsored our legislation. And yet that legislation went nowhere. And it didn't take us too long to figure out why, what the problem is. So let's look at that a little bit. And here is the issue. The issue is all about the rules and who drives the rules or who controls the rules. And, we're not here to point fingers necessarily, just to tell the facts. And the reality is in Harrisburg, how things work, we learned, and perhaps you know this as well, is that who's ever in charge, and certainly on the majority party, who's ever in charge, the majority leaders, and you see the titles here, largely speaking, they drive the bus. They decide what legislation moves and what legislation does not. So even a wonderful group like Fair Districts with 60% support from rank and file legislators on our legislation over a 4-year period went nowhere in both houses. In fact, we got smacked in the face a couple of times with committee chairs who wonderfully tore up our legislation on camera. So I think that was the wake-up call, certainly for Fair Districts and perhaps even for the league, to understand that there's real root cause issues here, why good legislation, and you'll see tonight our emphasis on bipartisan legislation, why so often it goes nowhere. So they were the titles here, and this is what we learned. Majority party leaders write the rules. Rules say majority leaders will select committee chairs. I won't read all of this on my slide. You can certainly help yourself to it. But the reality is, majority leaders, what we call the 1%, these are up to 4 leaders in the House and the Senate whose total vote represents maybe 1% of all votes cast for state legislators in any given year, are dictating to all of Pennsylvania, all 13 million of us, what legislation moves and what doesn't. And by God, if you're a member of the minority party in either house, good luck. Because the reality is your bills, more often than not, have no chance of moving, certainly getting out of committee or even be considered within the committee, because committee chairs, much like the leaders at the higher levels, are dictating what's important and what's not. And you'll see the question in purple here that we ask wherever we go when we're talking about Fitz-Harrisburg and reforming our rules. Does your local legislator really have any influence, even if they're in the majority party? Our answer is, by and large, an emphatic no. The experience tells us that's true. We'll take a look here. Every 2 years, the first day of our legislative 2-year sessions, and the next one is January 2 of 2025. The rules are quickly positioned for a vote, quickly voted, and then we move on, because rank and file have no say. Minority party has no say. Minority party leadership has no say. The very small handful that you can count on one hand, 2 fingers often, in the House and in the Senate, dictate what the rules are going to be because they've been worked out ahead of time. The history, particularly in the House, is when it comes to that day one event, the rules are put up not for a vote, but first to agree to a vote that we will not allow any changes to the rules. So think about that. And we're going to talk specifically about your Bucks County legislators and all the newbies that came in 2022. Their very first vote was agreeing to not amend the rules. And then their second vote was, of course, to support the rules. Now, that's a majority party for the most part who those pressure campaigns are laid on early on that first day. But that's simply the way it is. This is a done deal. This is a preordained deal that goes down on the first day of every 2-year legislative session. We didn't know this when we first got in this business of advocacy for our legislation. We were stunned, and over time now, not surprised, because we've seen it happen over a couple of different 2-year sessions. So, and again, what we try to say is, look at these bipartisan hopes are dashed. And most importantly, your local legislators in the House and in the Senate have ceded their influence to majority party leaders. The majority party leaders drive the bus. They dictate what we're going to move, and what we're not going to talk about or deal with during the 2-year session, legislation-wise. So our conclusion, obviously, is that the rules are the problem. And as I said below, our experience and what we saw with the party change in the House, nothing behavior-wise really changed in the House. That in this case, the Democrats who took control by the slimmest of margins in our Pennsylvania House really, what's the best way to say it? Really said, hey, we're going to do things our way. There was a couple of interesting provisos that I'll cover in the next slide or two, but for the most part, they said it's our turn. And in many cases, that was layered on very much with we've waited 12 years since our last time that we were leaders, that we had the majority, and we're going to do it our way. Minority party, sit down, please. We're driving the bus. So, and here's our look back. This is what we've concluded based on, and we have folks at Fair Districts who do very, very in-depth reporting. We're not just kind of waving our hands here and saying, see this or see that. We have people who are writing reports, who do the research, who dive deep into legislative records in the House and in the Senate. And this is what we've seen over the last 4 years. We're seeing a little bit of movement on a few of these issues. We're not going to cover any of these issues because there's all of these and others as well that have lingered in our state for these many years where nothing substantive gets done, even though there is outcry across the state that something has to be done. You may have other issues that you personally care about beyond what you see on this list. But believe me, the reality is it's very, very tough in our state for a variety of reasons, but root causes are plainly obvious. That, Jesus, why doesn't this tough stuff get addressed? Why doesn't this tough stuff, these really tough issues that we as voters across the state want our legislator to tackle head on and be upfront and truthful about it? Now, even today, you may have seen a headline with equitable school funding. I'm not going to dive in it today, but we know that's been a major headline over the last year or so based on some court rulings that went down. There's been a commission, a so-called bipartisan commission. They came up with their report today. We'll wait and see to see what happens, if anything, on this critical issue that impacts so many kids across the state, that a vast majority of us as citizens in our state want some kind of resolution to be resolved, but all these other issues as well that have been hanging around for years, or in some cases, decades, and nothing happens. So again, this is quick report card. I'm not going to read this. This is all based on the research done by our reporting team at Fair Districts. And I want to let you know that all in addition to this historical perspective, we are now committed to publishing 6-month reports on our Pennsylvania legislator performance, what's happening, what's not happening, and why aren't these critical issues happening. And these reports are not necessarily for everybody. These are reports that we're writing for the benefit of all of our 253 state legislators right now. And the reality is, if you're one of these rank and file legislators who are frustrated at your bills that you came to office fervently hoping that you would get attention and get the things you care about passed, things are not happening. Look at these numbers. And the reality is these numbers reflect what's even happened with our current 2023 coming into 24 legislative sessions. And when we're talking about this, I'm talking about the House and we're talking about the Senate. We're highlighting obviously now the newer dimension that we've seen in 2023, that the relationship between the House and the Senate, which in our view has always been somewhat strained, even when it was single party, is that has reached new levels of indifference or bad mouthing that is really getting in the way of getting things done. And again, we don't know why. We understand hardcore ideological issues that with a mixed party structure we have in the House and Senate, we understand some of those aren't going to go there. But nothing that I posted on that prior page about these long and lingering issues that the vast majority of Pennsylvanians want resolved are not ideological. They are issues that have to be addressed, much like they're addressed in so many other legislators across the state and we're across the country. And we simply want to say why. Even in the House and the Senate, the terrible 6 months late with what everyone in legislature considers their number one issue, which is the darn budget, typically passed by the end of June. We didn't get anything done till the end of December. I don't care, and maybe, and I hope you don't, we don't care what the reasons were. There was no excuse, no reason that we had a 6-month delay on getting basic legislative function to do their job. It's a 6-month delay, and so many other entities across the state that rely on state funding, whether it's schools or libraries, townships, county seats, all of this stuff just hung up in the air and really stuck it to so many different players who depend on this funding. And again, we ask this, and again, our legislators, when we talk to them, not all, but many are sensitive to the criticism that, yeah, we hear it. Yes, we are the largest full-time legislator in the country, 253 full-time paid legislators who just got a raise. And again, we're saying, what's the problem, boys and girls? Why is this, regardless of who comes, who stays, new players coming in, veteran legislators leaving, the same old performance always seems to sustain itself, and we don't know why, but we do know why. And that's because we keep coming back to the rules and how they're commanded and executed by those few party leaders, regardless of party. So if things aren't working, this is where fair districts came in. We're saying we need to get to the root cause, and the root cause of this poor legislative performance is the rules. So what we want to do, simply put, is take the hyperpartisan thumbs off of the scale, which means forcing leadership to give up some of their power that they have, regardless of party and how willingly they execute it. So this is what we originally proposed last year, and this is what we're going to be coming back with. We wanted a total focus on bipartisan legislation that surprisingly is more common and more frequent than you think. But these were the 3 stipulations that we asked for. A lot of this, of course, was based on the 60% support we were getting for our redistricting reform legislation. But we wanted to guarantee a vote in committee for solutions with strong bipartisan support, because, as I may have mentioned earlier, not in all cases, but in many cases, we have committee chairs, whether on their own or following leadership instructions, decide in committee what's going to move and what's not, regardless of the committee membership support that there may be for any legislation. We're saying that's wrong, and we're saying we want to guarantee a vote for bipartisan supported legislation. And the example that we had with our original redistricting reform legislation certainly fit this bill. We want to guarantee a vote on the chamber floor. There is a slew of arcane rules controlled by majority leader in the House and Senate, supported by the president of the Senate or the speaker, that allow gamesmanship with legislation that comes out of committee and whether or not it will get scheduled for a chamber vote. And we're saying eliminate a lot of that nonsense and guarantee a vote for strong bipartisan solutions that coming out of committee, because obviously it does have some momentum and it deserves to be heard. It deserves to get, at some point, a floor vote in both chambers. And here's the strongest one that's real tough. We understand it because of the dysfunction we see so often, certainly between the House and Senate. We want to look for solutions that if a bill passes in one chamber, whether it's the Senate or the House, that we're saying that with the background it's coming out of from whichever assembly, that if it came with bipartisan support, it should get a vote in that other chamber on the floor. It's a big ask that we're asking for, but it's the only way to really deal with the hardcore root cause issues that we have here. It does say leadership has to give it up because, as we've proven, we're not blind. We have, like I said, with our reporting and research team, we're tracking what's going on with bipartisan solutions. And we're delivering reports to leadership saying, why didn't Bill X, Y, or Z that had this kind of demonstrated bipartisan support, why did it not get out of committee? Or why did you play games with it on the scheduling or whatever you may have done not to push for it in the other chambers? So this is stuff that, is obvious to anyone like ourselves who sees this going on and wants to do something about it. But this is what we originally came with, these three proposals. This is what certainly we're going to be coming back with come the new session as well. In addition to what I proposed, this is what we saw during the negotiation period in the House only, I'm going to talk about, that we thought we had a better chance with the slimmest of majorities in the House, that we came back and started pushing for some of these others as well. I won't tell you we got them because there was some agreement for example, the Pennsylvania Constitution Amendment. This was a Mark Rossi, you may have recalled, he was speaker for 2 months or so. This did get support in the House that going forward, any of our Pennsylvania constitutional amendments proposed to us as voters need to be single issue only, as opposed to a smorgasbord of different issues that get lined up in the voting booth and overwhelm the everyday voters. Single issue only constitutional amendments. It did pass by the slimmest of slim majorities in the House, went nowhere in the Senate as a rule change. This one, called Priority Bill Options, does get a smile from membership in both parties, in both houses. When we pitch this idea to legislators, even those who strongly oppose fair districts, it does get, yeah, kind of like that. What we're saying here with priority bills is that every legislator is allowed to propose and to get a committee and floor vote on a bill that they deem a priority bill. Every legislator gets to get their moment in the sun to say, this is a priority bill by the new rules, which we wish were in play, would get their day in the sun to say, we're going to get a committee vote, and we're going to get, if we get that committee support, that we would get that floor vote in either chamber for their priority bills. And keep in mind, particularly in Bucks County, with so many newer members in both assemblies, that when a new legislator, and certainly experienced veteran legislators, they do care about a couple of things passionately, most of them anyway. So this was a way to play to their passions via this priority bill option. Just wanted to tell you, it didn't go anywhere in the House and the Senate. It was snuffed out by leadership. We also fought feverishly for committee chair assignment games and committee staffing. Right now, the leadership picks committee chairs. So it's a pure political play, not always based on merit or expertise by any stretch. We think that's wrong. And the committee staffing historically has been so overwhelmingly slanted for the majority party that it gives the minority party no voice, no hope in those various committees. So we came up with some different formulas that should reflect the ratios in the House and the Senate of majority party to minority party. So you can imagine in the House, and we saw obviously one-person majorities in the House, that our ratio, of course, would demand committees that would be made up with a one-person majority party difference in those committees. Well, leadership didn't like that, not by a long shot. So it died. In the Senate, where we have 28-22, so it's a little bit right now ratio-wise of a 56-44, we see a lot of committees that are, 60-40 or even 2/3, 1/3 ratios on committee staffing. And they're a road to nowhere, at least as far as bipartisan supported legislation, because all they're trying to do there is guarantee majority party legislation only will see potential light of day and get a vote in the Senate. So again, wonderful idea went nowhere. And then this is something which is a little arcane for a lot of folks, but we saw so many examples of what we call rush jobs that violated existing rules, where existing rules say there must be very, very specific lead times for issues. And there's and particularly in an all-powerful committee called Appropriations in the House and in the Senate, all bills that are legislation, not necessarily resolutions, but legislation has to go through the Appropriations Committee. And it has very fixed time for the lead time to deliver that bill to that Appropriation Committee, as well as for the Appropriation Committee to review and vote on to get it moving on its way out. And we saw multiple violations of last second feeds to the Appropriations Committee, who took no time, who did a quick majority party vote and got it moving another way. And I don't want to tell you the few times they egregiously changed the content. So I'm, again, just giving you the examples of other issues where we've learned, and chances are we're probably going to be coming back with variations of some of these rules, because these rules, in our view, and based on our research, cut to the heart of why bipartisan legislation dies on the vine so often. All right. So if we again take one more look at what happened to the rules in 2023 in the Senate, nothing changed. The rules that have been in play in prior sessions were same old, et cetera, et cetera. It was 2-second conversation, 2-minute vote, and away they went. Nothing changed. In the PA House, as I mentioned, we didn't all get, but these are the notables that we want to keep an eye on. We did like a couple of other issues that were actually generated by the minority party in the House. Representative Brian Cutler is the former Republican Speaker of our PA House. And from a redistricting standpoint, he said, hey, from now on, when we start looking at changing our congressional maps come the new redistricting cycle, this time bring a map. The history shows the last 30 years or 3 redistricting cycles, you didn't need to have a map in order to propose redistricting changes. Unbelievable. At least we thought, hey, there we go, somebody with a little common sense and a good idea. Did it happen in the rules? No, it didn't happen. But this did happen, the discharge petition, which is a way to circumvent leadership when enough legislators get together. And this 25 and 25 means we need 25 from party A, 25 from party B, as a means to say we have a piece of legislation. We're going to circumvent leadership here, and we're going to execute a discharge position. This actually did happen in the House, and both parties kind of applauded it. It hasn't been used yet as a means for moving legislation at this point, but it is out there right now. Leadership doesn't like it, of course, because it's a challenge to their leadership, but it did go into play, and we hope it stays because we think it's not a bad way to operate. And then you can read my language at the last point down below. Behavior-wise in the House, from a leadership perspective, nothing really changed of substance. So regardless of the party change, once you have the power and it's your turn, you're driving the bus, guess what? Human behavior takes over. It's our turn, and we're going to go. And that's what happened. And so we understand that, and that's the way it is. Okay. So this is my last slide on reforms, the rules here, and what we call their Fix Harrisburg campaign, is that our working assumption going forward, this is our lessons learned. Behavior in both houses, nothing changed behavior-wise from leadership in 23, won't change in 24. So nothing's really on the change. But what we're doing is issuing these every 6-month reports. We are trying to hammer home to our legislative leaders, and these are reports we give to all the legislators in the House and the Senate, so they're aware, in case they're not paying attention, that the things that they care about, what moved, what didn't move, whether it was in the House, whether it was in the Senate, or whether it was across the chambers and not getting the kind of votes, in particular, good bipartisan legislation we think deserves. So our focus for 2025, I know it's only January and we're 12 months away, but this is what we're going to be pounding away on, is to continue to raise awareness that the rules are the root cause for our poor performing legislature, and to make sure that leadership is aware of it, and they are, as well as all of our rank and file legislators. Many are, but not all are. But we're going to keep issuing our performance reports, and we're going to start again with what we'll call a more broad-based advocacy to each legislator involving regular citizens, probably starting, we're guessing, probably around September 2024. So, and that is my last slide on reform the rules. Do we have anything in chat? Or was it so easy to understand and so obvious? Sharon, anything?
I do see one thing. Roz, do you see it? Okay, let me see. Is there a particular state legislature in the United States that could serve as a good role model for reforming Harrisburg, is the question.
The answer is yes, but it's not something that will bring smiles to one of the parties, because when you start comparing, the one that we've looked at who was very, very good was Colorado. Now, Colorado is very blue, so the other party in Harrisburg is not going to say, ooh, tell me more, I want to learn. So we know that conversation ends quickly. So to be honest with you, we've actually been looking at a few other states, and Nevada is an example, which is legislature-wise is more Republican than Democrat, and they actually have some very, very interesting rules for how they get things through. So we're starting to incorporate some of the Nevada examples where they get things done. And Nevada is an example of a state where the legislator doesn't even meet that often, and yet they seem to get the important stuff done. So we think in retrospective, we probably shouldn't have emphasized so much the Colorado play. So when we're coming back again in 2025, regardless of who's the majority party in the House or Senate, we're going to keep stressing best practices that we've learned from other states. It's a good way for other states to learn. And believe me, in many cases, our example has been in the House, keep this in mind, we had 25% turnover, 25% new legislators came in January of 2023, just a year ago. We may get more of that kind of turnover in the House and Senate come 2025. So when new legislators come in and they start hitting brick walls real fast, regardless of whether majority or minority party, they start wondering why. So we're hoping, as we have in the past, gotten pretty receptive ears with newbies or those who haven't been there long, but we always, as much as possible, concentrate on the rank and file. Sharon, any other questions?
Nope, that looks like it.
So everybody, just keep in mind, fair districts, a part of course, the wonderful League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. We will be revving it up more publicly come the latter half of this year, because, can you see this guy now?
Not yet.
Let's see if we can get this one up.
There it is.
Okay.
Mhm.
And see the plug below. I just put it in 5 minutes before we went online here. But thank you, Fair District. Thank you, Fair Districts, for being created by the League of Women Voters in Pennsylvania. Fair Districts remains, by and large, we're a single mission organization. We're all about redistricting reform. This is what we do. This is what we talk about. This is what we breathe and eat all day, every day. As Sharon mentioned, I've been a volunteer since 2017, and we can't count ourselves as a neophyte organization. We've been battered and bruised by your state legislature over the last few years, and we're ready to move on. We're coming back. We're not giving up, and we're going strong. So what we'll do, let me spend a few moments just on basics of how we redistrict in Pennsylvania, and then we'll get into some of the root causes here. Basic definition. What I'm showing you is what we show to all of our target audiences here. Whether we're presenting to citizens in Bucks County, next month, I'll be presenting in Lehigh and Berks County as well, Montgomery County as well. We're happy to go everywhere, and this is pretty basic stuff. Everyone's clear definition of what gerrymandering is. And this is the important, this is the one, these are the two pieces of information that we want to share. And I always say it, when I joined, I was just like 99.2% of all Pennsylvania citizens. I had no clue how redistricting was done in our state. And this is how it's done. It's not that complicated as far as what the rules were. But if you take a look, train your eyes on the right side first with the Pennsylvania congressional districts. Our congressional districts, 17 of them right now. In 2031, when the time comes post-census to draw our congressional districts again, maybe we have 17, we probably won't have 18, we might have 16. And what we've learned through all of our map drawing exercises is, if you follow some basic rules, drawing 16, 17, 18 congressional districts is not the hardest job in the world. And the reality is, given the basic rules for following, it should be pretty straight up. Our experience has been that you can draw a pretty decent congressional map for the state in about 1 to 2 days, if you know a little bit about how to use the data that's publicly provided, as well as the software, which makes map drawing a lot easier than it used to be. But the key here I want you to remember is that it's straight legislation in the House and in the Senate. And the majority party controls the process of how that legislation and the maps that accompany that legislation move through the legislative process. Not cool, we don't like it. And over the certainly last 3 decades, it's really created real problems, because for the last 3 decades, those maps for our congressional districts never really passed the House without appeals to the Supreme Court. And I just want to let you know that certainly from a fair district standpoint, and I think it's fair to say the league perspective, we don't want Supreme Courts drawing maps either. We think there's better ways, which we'll get to in a few slides. But the only critical stipulation when it comes to what rules need to be followed when drawing our 17 congressional maps is the Federal Voting Rights Act. You can see the details below. But if you've been following the actions of our current United States Supreme Court, the Federal Voting Rights Act has been chipped away at, a little here, a little there, and we have a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who was a fervent opponent in his younger days, not on the Supreme Court, of this Voting Rights Act, and is certainly interested in chipping away even more if possible. So it's a real problem. That's why we think there has to be better ways for us to pursue and reform how our congressional districts will be drawn in the future. Eyes shift to the left side. How our state house, that's 203 state house maps and 50 state Senate district maps, are drawn by an organization called the LRC, the Legislative Reapportionment Commission. This is all dictated in a couple of paragraphs in our Pennsylvania Constitution. Article 2, Section 16. But the LRC, and you can see, if you can read, who makes it up, it's by nature wholly political as a membership constitution. Leadership, party leaders of the House, party leaders of the Senate, and a appointed chair. If the party leaders, the 4 party leaders can't agree on who that all-important LRC chair will be, the state Supreme Court appoints that person. That's what happened if you were following our most recent 2011 and 2021 LRC activities, or how the composition of the commission was made. But it is a wholly political organization with political objectives in mind. The House and Senate, rank and file House, rank and file Senate, have no say. The governor has no say. And the commission plan is final unless, again, if the state Supreme Court, or even worse, federal courts have to get involved with those 203 state maps and those 50 state Senate maps that have to be drawn. And our Pennsylvania Constitution provides this kind of language down below. not very specific, and ripe for gamesmanship by those drawing the maps who have wholly political objectives in mind. Okay, so what I want to do for tonight is focus on, geez, the latest maps went down in 2021 in time for our May 2022 elections, and I'm going to focus on the state maps and the behavior and results of the LRC, the Legislative Reapportionment Commission. So when we take a look at the Senate, Bucks County got 3, just about right. Again, with a little bit of overlap, but based on the Pennsylvania census population, we had about 13 million. It was just about 13 million was the final Pennsylvania statewide census population count. There are 50 state Senate districts to be drawn. So if you do your division, you come up with about a state senator needs to cover about 265,000 population. I didn't say citizens, I said population. So do the basic math. It requires about 3 Senate maps. But our problem with the Senate, not just in Bucks, but across the state, you can read what's been written. This is our fair district's position. The phrase we're using, it was a buddy mander. I was one of many, many fair districts volunteers and lots of other interested citizens statewide, no doubt many, many league members as well, who watched the public televised portions of the LRC hearings. There was a lot of work, of course, by the LRC behind closed doors, but whatever was public, I watched as much as I could. And we were stunned on day 2 of the LRC public hearings when the 2 Senate leaders, majority and minority leaders, disappeared and came back a couple of days later, said, well, we've come to agreement on the new 50 state Senate maps and what we call, by any means, what we call a buddy mander. So there was no real public input. There was no expert input. There wasn't any kind of lobbying, even by, in many cases, publicly, I'll say, public lobbying by fellow state senators. And there wasn't even any, what we'll call in many cases, effective rank and file state Senate lobbying, because all they really care about is their own district. But what leadership cared about was not only protecting their own district, but as much as possible protecting whatever the status quo had for the day. So in this case, nothing substantially changed from a state Senate new maps perspective. And this is our language again, a buddy mander. No public input, no nothing of any kind, pure closed door decision-making by 2 leaders of the Senate who collectively represent about 2 to 2.5%. I'm sorry, my numbers are wrong, about 4%. They represent about 4% of the Pennsylvania electorate. Amazing that these 2 people could decide what's best in the Senate for the next 10 years based on their closed door agreements here. When we take a look at Bucks, you got your 3, but even that, to us, when we looked at it from a fair district's perspective, Jared Coleman is up in Senate 16, that's Northern Bucks, and he has Western Lehigh as well. But the Senate 6 and Senate 10, when we showed this early on to some other Bucks folks, when it first came down, it looked a little strange, particularly Senate 10, which looked like it was hugging the coastline of the Delaware River for all it could take. I'll let you decide based on what you've seen before or what you see now, what you think of that. But to us, it looked a little political as far as the map to guarantee that those districts, as much as possible, would stay with that same party through the next 4, maybe 5 election cycles. Let's look at the House. The House was a little bit different. There was no, at least for quite some time, closed door. We'll be right back with our future maps between the leaders of the House, between both parties here. you got based on population, you needed about 10 districts, House districts. Bucks County got 10. I'm not going to show you the Montgomery County map, which got carved up nastily again. We'll leave that alone for the Montgomery County audience on another night. But this is what went down. Generally speaking, we were okay because, again, we're not focused always on the end game. Legislators only care about the end result. We were looking at process. We continue to look at process. So there was, from our perspective, at least a lot of public testimony, whether it was submitted in writing or verbal presentation to the LRC. That went on for a number of days. And we had a lot of people coming from across the state, whether citizens or even legislators, making public pleas for their world, their county, even their district, and what they wanted out of it. And we thought in some cases, not all, that the LRC listened, and when they got together with their map making, took all that input into consideration. Generally speaking, across the state, not too bad. Specifically in Bucks County, you got your 10 districts. There are no out-of-county districts or multi-county districts, unlike what we see in Montgomery County. But so we didn't see the egregious splits there, but we did see some other splits that we go, man, how'd that happen? So Middletown seemed to be ground zero for where the splits were. They get carved up 3 ways. New Britain, a very small population, and then Northampton, which is one of the larger populations, also got split. But when I see New Britain and when that went down, if you know where New Britain is, I believe it's over in that 144th, close to 178th district. It got carved up a little bit. For me as an outsider looking in, that was a tough one to take. So these are your folks. These are the districts that we're working with going forward. And I think population-wise, it made sense. Again, Fair Districts is not looking at, did it come out the way we think it should politically, or what some people call incorrectly competitive. You wound up with a 5-5 split between your 10 legislative districts. We don't care as much about who wins, who loses. We care about that process. How did it work out? And did they play the game the right way? So we'll save that. And if you have any questions on that, and you can see we have an open district right now in District 140 coming up with a special election next month. So, whoops, sorry. So let's move on now. That's the past. So we take a look at where are we going forward. This is what Fair Districts, this is foundation stuff for us. These are the facts that we've learned. We don't want the Supreme Court drawing maps again. They hire their own mappers to come in. They did it for the congressional districts in 2018, again in 2020. 2022, the state map was a buddy mander. That's a loser. So yes, it was a gerrymander by any definition. It was a gerrymander. And then we're simply asking this basic question. Why should we expect any changes? We're coming back in 2031. Why should we expect any difference, any kind of change or expectations or outcomes with a purely insider's game? That's how it's built today. That's how it's going to work again, if nothing changes. Fair District says, please, no. Let's change the players. Let's change the process. There's an inherent conflict of interest. Like I told you, these are politicians with political objectives drawing new maps. How else would we expect anything but a political outcome? What we want going forward, and this is what our next couple of slides are all about, this is what Fair Districts has proposed in the past. This is what we're coming back with, even at a more refined and specific level going forward. But you'll see the themes: independent redistricting commission, process transparency, excuse me, and prioritize rules for how we follow our map drawing. So again, I try to keep it simple as far as what are those themes: commission independence, process transparency, prioritize mapping criteria. I love to go with big print and simple themes as much as I can. Sometimes it's hard, so bear with me here going forward here, okay? Here we go with this stuff. So the commission, let's talk about our proposed independent redistricting commission. We want an 11-person commission. 4 from voters registered with the largest political party in Pennsylvania. 4 registered with the second largest political party. 3 coming from all the other parties. And if you haven't been watching, where is all the growth with registered voters coming from? It's coming with all those others, not Party A and Party B. They're shut out and hosed constantly in our world today. So we're making room for all of the so-called others. And this is just a kind of high level of all the folks who are not allowed or prohibited from being on that independent redistricting commission. And believe me, when we talk about our bill goes to very, very detailed language of who cannot or who is prohibited from applying for this job. Okay, sorry. And then really, this is all we're saying is our theme is that we want citizens' interests represented, not party leaders. And by now, you've probably figured out everything I've been talking about so far since I started. All we're asking is for party leadership to give up power. Easy, huh? Okay, so let's talk about that. So process transparency, our second theme for the commission. Again, lots of language in our bill talking about how it has to be transparent, how it has to be just the opposite of the world that we have to endure today via the LRC. And remember, what we're talking about is an independent redistricting commission that will draw both the congressional maps and all of our state legislative maps. They get it all. Party leaders get none of it. So, okay, again, just some themes here. And again, all of this will become apparent later on. And by the way, I have given these slides to Sharon in case you're curious. And Sharon is studying these deeply right now. We'll be providing detailed answers when we're done. So, thank you, Sharon.
Sure.
Okay. All right, I'm not going to go into this. You can read for yourself. But again, I just want to reassure you, our legislation this legislation is nasty in the sense it's a 9-page bill, single-spaced. So it is an intense reading, and we've covered coast to coast everything that we've learned, everything that we want, everything that we think is important for a proper independent commission, and in this case, certainly working transparently. And then the last thing is we want up on the walls for the people who are drawing the maps. Here's the rules. This is the rules you must follow. In addition to, obviously, we're talking about our US Constitution, federal laws, voting rights. There's also Pennsylvania rules that come into play here as well. But the idea here is that we're going to be stipulating as clearly and as easily understood as possible. These are the map-making rules that you must follow as much as possible when it comes to a few of them. But when it comes to legal rules, no conditions, no exceptions. All right, so we're trying to get this out in the open, up on the walls for everyone to see. So there's no surprises and no, as much as possible, disappointment when people don't understand why certain districts went down. And again, we're not going to be focusing purely on outcomes that says, geez, it must be competitive X, Y, and Z. Remember this, that competitive, in many cases, is in the eye of the beholder. When it comes to legislators, all they care about is their district, or a legislative leader, all they care about is, did I maintain my job, and did I maintain at minimum the status quo, or a shot to give our party a majority come the next election cycle? So we want to make sure all about the process is fair and square and public and transparent as possible, okay? So we just want to make sure, and again, this is more of it. This is very, very deep when we get into the bill, but we also make sure that this is how we work. I wanted to make one important point as well for everybody here. Carol Conahome, as many of you know, has been our longtime leader, chairperson for the Fair Districts of Pennsylvania organization. And she's, I believe, still part of the executive committee for the League of Women Voters in Pennsylvania. Carol started early in 2023 with what she helped form called the Redistricting Table. That was a number of good government groups that focused on one thing. What do we need to do to make it even better? What do we need to do to give ourselves a chance to reform our current redistricting process in Pennsylvania? And not only does it include Carol from Fair Districts, but includes other leadership from the Committee of 70, from Common Cause, for the Coalition for Justice. There are a number of other what we call not just good government groups, better government groups who have had and continue to have their say and will continue to have their say as we go through this process right now. We're on the verge, and you'll see this in a minute, of introducing our bill, and we know that it'll be met with obviously resistance, and we want to make sure that we have as much lobbying strength and power and influence and knowledge as possible when it comes to countering legislator opposition. Okay, so this is all basic stuff here. All right, so this is what I'm almost done here, everybody, so have hope. So this is where this is what we're doing, what we go out, and Sharon and many of you know what it's all about. We need to go out and not only persuade everyday citizens, but we need to persuade 51% of the legislature in order to get our legislation passed. So all of this, so this is what you're looking at here is kind of how we want to appeal directly to legislators. If nothing changes, same old, and I'll let my last line, just take it. All right, that's our job. Well, I don't care. We don't care if you don't like it. Your job is to take whatever you get. And we're saying nonsense. But this is the question we're posing to all 253 legislators in Harrisburg today, and will continue to do regardless of who's in that seat through the upcoming years. The reality is this: nobody knows who will control in 2031 when these maps must be redrawn. The House, the Senate, or the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We don't know. And if you think you know, you're fooling yourself. So what we're asking all legislators, and what we will be asking all state legislators, why take such a career risk when they can detach themselves from that risk and what we call a proposed constitutional amendment? And yes, everything I'm talking about here will require that constitutional amendment as an, and this is of course my spin, easy and sensible first step. This is a tough pill, but we have so many legislators with no influence and will have no say in how the maps will be drawn. So if there are legislators who want to keep their job and they want to be there in 2032, these are the people, male and female alike, who we want them to take a deep breath and noodle on this key question. Why should you take the career risk? Unless you're in leadership, and even then, minority leadership has very, very little influence on how the maps will go down. So finally, we ask you as the everyday citizens, are you okay with the current redistricting process? We hope you're not, because the legislature and how these things are done today, at least on the state side, has been in place since the 1968 Constitutional Convention. I know it doesn't sound that long ago, but politically it's eons ago. Our world has changed. We live more now in a hyper-partisan world, and whatever was done in 1968 doesn't work very well and hasn't worked for at least the last few decades in Pennsylvania. So we come to the point where it's time for a change. All right, so only 2 slides, I believe, to go, and then we're done. Again, let's take another look at past performance or future performance, we hope, of your Bucks legislators. You can do the reading for yourself. Jarrett Coleman is new. What we find very exciting in Fair Districts when we take a look at Bucks County is that we not only have new legislators, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of your 13 state legislators are new, which means they came into play in 2022. They have no track record, no voting record when it comes to redistricting reform. So they're a blank slate as far as we're concerned. And you also have a few who are, and again, you see me with the maybes, they're going, oh, you know, and I'll leave it at that. They're interested. But I also will tell you this. In the House, not necessarily in the Senate, we're tracking very closely the voting records of many of these Bucks, of all the Bucks County House members, as well as what's happening in the Senate. And we see some very interesting results. Perhaps folks who are open to it. The good news is that we are close, as I mentioned, is that we are ready. We're kind of tidying up shop right now. In order to get bills introduced in the House and in the Senate, you need prime sponsors. Legislators should put their names at the top of the bill. Then you get a bill number. I'm not giving you that secret bill number tonight, because who knows if it changes tomorrow, it looks stupid. So, but the idea is that today in the House, we have Representative Samuelson, Lehigh County, I think, or is he? Yeah, he's Lehigh County. And Mark Gillen is the Republican prime sponsor. He's over in Berks County. Tim Carney is the prime sponsor. He's Delco. And then we're hoping, we've been doing some intense lobbying with Senator Tamara Bartolotta, who has a very interesting bipartisan track record. She's Western Pennsylvania, and we're hoping that she will decide in the next week or so to be the Senate prime sponsor. We want to be introducing with bipartisan prime sponsorship. That's our goal. We want to see if we can close the door. And all of that is going to happen pretty soon. So I will end this by simply saying your future outreach to your state rep and your state senator is very much appreciated. We will be asking you in the future, we think the not too distant future, to begin calling your legislators to book meetings to advocate for redistricting reform. It's not too early. This is a difficult, in many cases, arduous process. A constitutional amendment is tough to get passed in Pennsylvania. It requires legislation to pass unchanged with 2 consecutive legislative sessions, which means for us, we need to focus on the 25-26 session. We don't think it's going to happen now. It just isn't. So we're not worrying about 2024. But come 2025, we need that session, that 2-year session, we need a legislation to pass. And then the 27-28 legislative session, it needs to pass again, unchanged. That then sets up the process for posting the proposed constitutional amendment to we, the everyday voters, when we go to vote. And we are not supporters of having this amendment, if we get that far, posting it during a primary, when 15-18% of voters come out. That's gamesmanship that we think is wrong. We would target ideally November 2028, which would be, God help us, another presidential election year, where we would be hoping to get our constitutional amendment voted on by everyday citizens. So it is a long road, but without the cliche, the long road has to start somewhere. And this is where we are today. And we're hoping you will be ready to help us with our advocacy. And there's the last slide. This is us. Thank you very much for listening. And if there's any questions, Sharon will be glad to answer in detail.
No questions in the chat. You did such a thorough job. I think we've got
Well,
it.
maybe that tells us we have a very, very educated audience here. So I think we probably do, is my guess. So Sharon, did I finish ahead of time?
No, I think you need to stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
Right.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
I'm out.
There we go. All right. And I'm going to put up my last screen. Can everybody see that? Yep. Let me see. Let me minimize that again. All right. Yeah, let me try that again. And there it is. And share. Okay. All right, there we go. Thank you, Rich, for such an informative program about this critical issue. We have a lot to think about and a lot to work on for sure. And I want to thank everyone tonight for joining us. For anyone who'd like to learn more about what our league does, I encourage you to visit our website and follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, which I now called X, and we have a YouTube channel. This presentation will be posted to our YouTube channel within the next few days. And finally, if you aren't already a member, please consider joining our efforts to empower voters and defend democracy. Everyone is welcome. And also visit the Fair Districts PA website to continue to learn more about this critical issue. So thank you again. Good night, everybody.